just a quick introduction to myself before I introduce the work that we do here at the Centre. So, as Rob said, I'm an associate professor here in Innovation and Entrepreneurship, but I've not always been an academic. And that is pretty much true of almost everybody at the Centre that we created, which I think is important. So my background was initially in university career services. So I've been a kind of careers coach for years and years. I was the head of a university career service at Bath Spa University, where we were generating lots of students to go out into the kind of creative arts and creative industries. So their version of employability looked a lot like entrepreneurship. And I think that was kind of really important. I was a director of a UK organisation, the National Network for Enterprise Educators in the UK, and I served as chair of that organisation for a year as well. And I did all of that before I became an academic. But even now, I'm not just an academic. I'm also moonlighting as a freelancer, and I'm the lead educator for a programme called the ARC Accelerator, which is helping arts and social sciences academics in the UK commercialise their research ideas. So this is an audience that has historically been quite resistant to the idea of kind of commercial realization of ideas, but we are able to disguise innovation and entrepreneurship advice in the form of impact guidance to help them kind of create ideas that can change the world. And it's that idea of ideas that can change the world that really sits at the heart of what we've tried to build here in the Centre at the University of Bristol. So we are not just, as it were, educating entrepreneurs and founders. We are as interested in entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, innovators, civic leaders, activists, just creating good citizens, really, who can generate ideas, spot ideas, evaluate ideas, and act on those ideas to create real value in the real world. Why did we call this innovation rather than anything else is a question that we often get. And why did we do this at all? So we noticed that the world has more than a few problems, and we are kind of cognizant of the fact that actually most of those problems are going to be solved by interdisciplinary solutions. They're probably not going to come from single silos. They're going to come from those interesting interfaces where different people from different silos, different walks of life, spot something and make something new happen. But we also need people who aren't just generating those ideas. We need people who are implementing those ideas. So those people need to be resilient, they need to be adaptable, and they need to be change makers. We also know that it's not just, as it were, people who want to do this. It's also that the wider world wants these people to come forward. That actually one of the trends that we saw before we created all this was that increasingly employers of our graduates wanted people who were resourceful, who had initiative, who could solve problems, who could work in teams and communicate. And we also knew that smaller companies who weren't typically part of that big graduate recruitment market particularly needed those people because they were going to be landing in smaller, more agile organizations where people had to do more things. So we had drivers from different sectors. We had more and more students wanting to do this stuff. We had employers wanting students who knew how to do this. And we also knew that the wider job market would benefit from this. We also knew from supporting researchers to commercialize that actually their researcher skill set by itself was not enough. They needed to be interdisciplinary themselves to think about how they could realize impact from the research they were doing. We also found along the way that entrepreneurship is a sort of divisive term, that as many people will go, yeah, will also go, no, I want nothing to do with this. That's not how I self-identify. As I've already hinted at, a large part of the academic research community don't particularly like the idea of self-identifying as an entrepreneur. Innovation was a much more palatable term. It still wasn't right for everybody, but it was the thing that we found that most people resonated with. Whenever we said business and entrepreneurship, arts and social sciences students and staff would kind of walk away. Whenever we said creativity, we would find that the engineers and the scientists would go, oh, that's not us, that's not what we do. But actually innovation was a word that seemed to cut through for all of those audiences. So a bit of a download on how and why we've done this at the University of Bristol. So the University of Bristol, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a traditional, what we call Russell Group institution here in the UK. So it's in the sort of the top echelon of research-intensive universities. So whilst we are a teaching centre, we are rooted in a research-intensive university across many disciplines. We also have a very decentralised system. Anyone who's worked in and around a university might recognise the sense that it's a series of tiny feudal kingdoms engaged in constant simmering warfare with one another for time and money and energy. The University of Bristol is no different. So it's sometimes a difficult place to make anything happen. Now, one thing that made it both difficult and easy was that at the time that we were created, there wasn't a business school. And that kind of meant that we had freedom to operate, but it also meant that because there wasn't a business school, a lot of people went, why are we doing this at all? It's also worth pointing out that the single biggest barrier to everything that we've done and everything that I'm going to describe has been timetabling. Because as you'll see, we are bringing students from lots of different disciplines into the same classroom at the same time to work together. And that is actually the single biggest barrier to all of this. What's also true is that in this particular university, as similar in many other institutions, I'm sure, the money that funds the process follows the students. So if you've got more students on a program, you get more money. And as a result, departments don't want to share their students because they get less money. So if we say to engineering, can we have some of your students for part of their course? Engineering often saying no, because they want to keep the money. Okay, so that's just backdrop. And if you've worked in a bureaucracy, as many I'm sure do, you'll understand. However, on our side was the fact that we've actually got a really diverse base of degree disciplines. We're not just a sort of science and engineering university. We have arts, modern languages, we've got a law school, we've got chemistry, we've got a medical school. We've got quite a good base for the size of university that we are. We also have a fantastic city. So Bristol as a city has a fantastic entrepreneurial ecosystem in the UK, absolutely one of the sort of top echelon in the UK. That's useful to have on our doorstep. We've always had the backing of some senior stakeholders who always thought this was an interesting and a useful thing to do at the top of the university. And in some ways, our whole story is the fact that what was originally planned to be a creative technologies degree between the computer science school and the theatre school exploded. Lots of other people went, oh, that's interesting. We should be part of this. Maybe we could be part of this kind of group that you're forming. They also found an alumnus who was really interested in this space and basically said that he was prepared to spend money on helping the university to make it happen. And because he was prepared to fund something, the university said, oh, right, we will help, we will make this possible. The alumni's money never actually turned up. But by the point where it became clear that he didn't actually intend to fund it, the university had already financially committed to doing it, and as a result, it happened anyway. So sometimes the promise of money is more important than the actual money as it transpired. More money has followed since, and other alumni have been very generous funders. As we've gone on, what we've also found, and that what has allowed us to kind of continue to survive and thrive, is we joke that we would have managed to recruit 100% of all of the student parents that we've ever met on a university open day. Even if the son or the daughter is like, oh, I'm not sure if this is for me, mum and dad are like, this is amazing, you should do this. This is the degree that I should have done 20 years ago. We've never had a single parent say, why are you doing this? This is ridiculous. Parents love it and they work on their kids as a result. The student feedback that we get is amongst the highest in the university. We get fantastic employability outcomes. You'll see more of this as we go on. We've also won a series of kind of sector education awards that have also kind of burnished our credentials. And over the 9 years that we've operated, we've consistently been able to grow our student base and make a profit. And that has made us a valuable part of the university because we're contributing financially to the university's health. So these are just some of the programs that we offer. So these are all of our undergraduate programs. So yes, they are all master's degrees, but they are all 4-year programs. So students are basically studying 3 years of an undergraduate degree, and they do a fourth year, and they get a master's degree at the end of it. They don't get a bachelor's unless they choose to leave at 3. They go straight through to a master's qualification. And in every year of their 4 years, they are doing some of that traditional discipline and some innovation. And when they do the innovation, they are with us. And you'll see this in a moment. We've also grown a series of postgraduate programs. So we've run a 1-year taught master's program in innovation and entrepreneurship for 8 years now. A few years ago, we grew 4 new programs that were basically pathways of that original program. And for the last 2 weeks, we have been running our new MAs in digital innovation. And there's a suite of 3 linked programs that we released last year. And we've got about 150 students on at the current moment. This is what the undergraduate program looks like. And what you can see here in the darker purple is this is the time that they are spending in their traditional disciplines. So if they are a physics with innovation, they spend 2/3 of their first and second year in physics with other physicists learning physics. It's not, as it were, innovative physics, it's the university's traditional physics. Equally, they might be in anthropology doing anthropology. But for the part of their week that is innovation, they spend it with us, and they might be a physicist sat next to an anthropologist, sat next to a musician and an economist and an accounting student, all working on stuff together. And to the best of our knowledge, that group of disciplines at this scale, because there's about 100 students in each of those years, is the only course of its kind in the world. And I think the reason that no one else has done it yet is timetabling, because getting them all in the room at the same time has been the single biggest barrier. As you can see that over their 4 years, they gradually spend more and more time with us, to the point where they do their dissertation with us here in the centre. That's the Going Wild unit in year 4. So they are getting a kind of a deep foundation in their degree discipline, but they are also getting this cross-cutting. We talk about T-shaped graduates. I'm sure you've probably heard that term. They've got disciplinary depth and a kind of cross-cutting, enabling know-how that they can talk across those disciplines. They know how to talk to each other. By the time they get to 4th year, they are all really good at working with each other to get stuff done. Often to the point where they have occasionally asked to work with students who don't work in innovation because they would like to work with more challenging people. That actually they know that each other know how to do this. But we get these really rich interdisciplinary mixes that create some really interesting ideas. It's also an interdisciplinary team who teach them as well. So actually, again, this isn't everybody. But within this staff team, whilst there are a handful of career academics, actually, we've got people who run design agencies. We've got people who've worked in TV and advertising. We've got people who are serial entrepreneur founders. We've got people who've worked in civil engineering. We've got people who've kind of run kind of arts and kind of creative businesses. We've got people who've run digital agencies. It's people who worked in government. It's a really rich mix of colleagues. And that really helps, like not just because we did different degrees. I mean, I was a classicist by background. Actually, we've got people who've come from very different backgrounds, and they're bringing that with them into the classroom. And again, I think that really has helped kind of create a model. It also means that we kind of quite inherently challenge what it means to be an academic in a traditional university, because very few of us are traditional academics. So we're constantly just by culture pushing against some of the university's norms. And it's led to some success. So we have graduates working at all of the sort of the big employers in the UK and kind of around the world, private sector and public sector. We've also put students out into kind of SMEs and startups. We are currently outperforming the wider university's graduate employability outcomes by about 14%. The only bits of the University of Bristol that are getting better graduate outcomes than us are the medics and the dentists. So we are doing better than the engineers and the computer scientists. We're doing better than the business school that has arrived since we started. And we get some great feedback. as well. So, recruiters actually saying, we are producing the best graduates that we see, and they love the way that our students can talk across the disciplines. They can use a whole variety of design tools, entrepreneurship tools in the work that they're doing. Now, this is something that when we come to questions, Mark, I'm sure, will contribute to as well, because this is much more his area than mine. But we're also producing a hugely high rate of graduate startups as well. So we think at about 10 times the national average in the UK for startups in this age group. And they have raised in excess of 20 million since the first graduating cohort in 2020. And we've provided some examples here of the kinds of startups that we're creating. But it is, not just VC backed, but all kinds of other sort of startup forms and formats across a whole variety of different industries. And we've also won a few awards for our pedagogy as well. So actually, just last month, we came second in the world for the Global Best Entrepreneurship Course at the Triple E Awards in Prague. And earlier this year, we came first in the UK for what we refer to as authentic assessment. So we are assessing students in ways that are authentic to the industries that they're going to work in. So we've got students writing client reports. We've got students giving pitches. We've got students kind of reflecting in the manner that they might as part of a CPD program within a workplace. We have a whole array of authentic forms of assessment that we're using with our students. And we've won a whole series of awards over time based around the pedagogy that we've been able to develop, which is extraordinarily experiential. We get students to go and do stuff. It's not about sitting in a classroom, it's about going and talking to real people. Every student does a client brief as part of their program. Every student does a kind of a mock venture creation as part of their program. We know that they learn by trying to do things and learning from the failures that almost certainly occur through that process. By the time our graduates get to graduation, they've probably worked on 7 team projects with different people, with real client briefs from real industries. They have failed repeatedly. They have had arguments with teammates. They have had to lead people through difficult circumstances. They are doing things that most graduates do only after they graduate. And they do this in the program. And that means we're also seeing our graduates find their way into experienced higher roles, even as graduates. So one of the things that I can see that Brian has asked me is about the idea of kind of innovation minors. So one of the things that's really worth understanding here is that in lots of national degree structures, you can do majors and minors. And for example, lots of the US universities who do entrepreneurship programs, fundamentally, they offer an entrepreneurship minor. So you can kind of study whatever it is that you're studying as your major with entrepreneurship as a minor. It doesn't work like that in the UK. We don't have, by and large, a major minor scheme in UK degrees. They tend to be single track, single major programs. So what we've been able to do is essentially offer quite a few students the opportunity to do a minor. But I think the bit that still makes us different, even from all of those minors elsewhere in the world, is the mix of students that we have in the room. In that when you come to our classroom, maybe you're doing business management with innovation, you might be sat next to a psychologist, a physicist, and a computer scientist. And I think sometimes in those minor programs, you still don't get that rich mix of disciplines. And I think that is one of our secrets. Like, one of our most successful student startups, Pequel, was a physics with innovation student and an anthropology with innovation student working on the same issue. And I think it's those rich combinations that make the difference. And as Mark says, yes, we haven't found anyone yet who does anything quite like us. But yeah, I hope that answers the question. I think in some ways, a lot of what we teach is not necessarily wildly dissimilar to innovation and entrepreneurship programs at other institutions. It's the mix. And it's also the fact that every one of our units is mandatory. So these are not sort of one-off electives that don't stitch together. It's a program. If you come through 4 years of this, we are building you steadily, scaffolding your learning all the way through from the fundamentals of user research and design through solving other people's problems to creating your own ventures to doing even more radical innovation in that fourth and final year.
Dave, Brian asks in the chat, why do you think more universities are not doing this? What you're saying about the diversity, the expertise, the practical application, the experiential nature. So
two things. One, Rob, if you're willing to help curate the questions, that'd be helpful, because I'm trying to read and answer.
Yeah.
I'm struggling. But just to answer that, I think it goes back to two key reasons. Timetabling. I know it sounds basic, but I can see a few people who are nodding along going, yeah, I can see that's a barrier in my institution. Simply getting what we have to be timetabled first in the whole university, approaching a year, and then they have to plan 4 faculties worth of timetabling around us. I mean, so whilst we might only have 100 students in the room, it's having a knock-on effect on the timetables of about 20,000 students, because you want to get your physicists and your psychologists in the same room at the same time. The second reason goes back to something I said at the start. It's money. If your university is threading money through the system following the student, actually what you'll find is that bits of the university don't want to give up parts of their students' timetable because they have to lose the money. And that means they're kind of reluctant to play along, and they're reluctant to collaborate. The universities that I think are making this work, and this is where the major minor thing comes in, is they've been able to, as it were, top slice some of the money from a student's fee at the moment of entry, and then use it to fund things that the university thinks are worth doing. That is still a big political battle within most UK universities.
There's another question in there, which is around which international projects are you and your which international projects are you and your students involved in? What's already done, and what, if any, are your plans in this area?
To be honest, it's a really good question, because actually, whilst we have had some international collaboration at quite an individual level between staff members and between students who want to work on kind of international projects, we don't have, as it were, a significant international kind of partnership in place. We are very open to the idea of doing so, but it's trying to find an institution who have a kind of I guess, a similar ethos around this to us. We've spoken to some of the big US universities, but they kind of largely looked at us as being a bit sort of small. And because of the major minor scheme, we do look a bit different, but we would be very open to an international collaboration if somebody wanted to join us.
Oscar, you have a question in chat around foresight and future strategy. Do you want to just ask Dave?
Yes, thank you. With pleasure. Yeah, I mean, regarding innovation, foresight also matters. So is it part of the program as well?
It is. It's actually something that we've added since we began. So there was a unit in the first year of the program called Design Futures. And that unit talks specifically about futures and foresight. But that was added, I'm going to say, about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Initially, our kind of foundational year 1 program was essentially user research, design thinking, and systems thinking as a way of kind of the foundational tools to sort of unpack the things that you might then want to change. And then in year 2, they do a live client brief, which is their chance to go and apply all of those tools in anger on a real project. And then in year 3, we step them up again so that they're not just solving someone else's problem, but they're actually finding a problem themselves that they think is worth solving in a kind of venture creation mode. And then in year 4, they have kind of even more autonomy to pick their own project, pick their own teams, and work on a thing that interests them. Some choose to go back to a client, some choose to do a venture, some choose to work in kind of policy change or government strategy or similar. But it's a sort of steady gaining of autonomy. But what we're now seeing is students building on that futures content, foresight content in year 1. And we could talk about it again in year 2, and we build on it again in year 3, gradually advancing their know-how that final year.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and so do I understand right? So it's very applied regarding also the cases. So there are real cases that you work on. Okay.
Yeah, so whilst we do use some case studies as examples, they are by and large working on a project in every year where we set them a live challenge.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
we've probably had about 60 different organizations set live client challenges to the students, and that's been everything from sort of, one-person charities through to one of the UK's government-backed security agencies has set a challenge to the students, and including some kind of major multinationals as well. But we always try and have a spectrum. Some of them are social purpose, some of them are much more commercial, but they get to work on live stuff. We expect them from year one to go and do live primary user research.
So great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I will surely reach out to you because I have planned something that goes in that direction.
Excellent.
So thank you very much for the introduction.
Ole, we'll come to you in just a moment. I just want to mention Russell's question. Russell, you've asked a question in chat. Do you want to just unmute and ask Dave?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Dave. Thanks for the presentation. My question was innovation means very different things in different academic disciplines. I'm a scientist by background, so it means one thing to me, but probably somebody who's working in an arts discipline or languages discipline, whatever, it's quite different. How do you find a common ground? How do you bring everybody to a common understanding of what innovation is and integrate them into the program?
Great question. We tend to do that by sharing with them lots of definitions of innovation. So in a sense, they can see the spectrum. So we're in the second week of teaching right now, and we had a session last week where we said, well, what do you think innovation is? And we kind of listened to what they thought it was, and a lot of them get very hung up on invention. And then we start to talk about, well, is it the technical invention, or is it the point at which it's adopted and it makes a change? Is it a process? Is it a mindset? Is it a competence? And we air all of this out. And in a sense, we try not to say, this is what innovation is limited to. And in fact, one of the assessments actually my students are working on at the moment is they have to come back to me with their own personal definition of innovation. And they have to explain how that is derived from other sources. So, what have the academics said? What have the professionals said? What do they now think it is? Because what we want them to have by the end of the program is that we want them to have internalized what innovation means to them as a practitioner of innovation. And that they ought to have a toolkit that they've kind of used and developed themselves that allows them to go and innovate in a whole variety of different contexts. It's not a recipe. We don't suggest that innovation is a recipe and one size fits all. Actually, it's hugely adaptable, and it's also very personal. Does that answer that?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much.
No, good question. Thank you.
Ole, your hand is up.
Yeah, so I have a question. I'm a practitioner, so I'm also very interested in after the graduation. I'm thinking about the companies, and I'm thinking career paths, because very few of the corporate entrepreneurs I meet benefit from a well-functioning career path in the companies where they're hired. Yeah. Do you see any positive or any development at the companies where your graduates get their first job? Because I think that's also part of the equation. I think what you're doing is great, and then
no, that's a really good question. We are talking about the idea that we are not just helping students get the first job, but we are also providing a skill set that will help them continue to get jobs for the rest of their career. Actually, it's not just maybe sort of a technical prowess. It's the ability to tell stories. It's the ability to work across functions. It's the ability to talk to other disciplines. And we try and bring people into the classroom who've had those kinds of careers, who can talk about, I started as a food scientist in one narrow silo, and now I'm working in kind of communications across the whole of a global conglomerate. And I'm a storyteller, and that's my job today. So we do try and reflect that. And I think we are doing a lot of the human skills. I don't like calling them soft skills. I prefer human skills that are the sort of the resilience, the communication, the teamwork, the problem solving, so that they can invent and reinvent themselves over the course of their career. one of the challenges actually in this space, we'd love to hear some of your views, because my students will constantly ask me, they say, well, what can I do with an innovation degree? Is there a job title? Because it's not like being an accountant. It's not like being an engineer where there is an obvious job title. Actually, when I send my students to look at the graduate job market, are they going to be associates, researchers, consultants, junior partners, user researchers? Like, there's so many job titles. It's actually quite hard for them to know what to look for because every company seems to call this something different. But we do also know that almost every company is looking for innovative graduates, not necessarily in an innovation role, but I can't think of a recruiter who isn't looking for somebody who isn't going to add additional value over and above the job description. We hope that we're going to hire somebody who isn't just going to keep a seat warm. They're actually going to do the job and then a bit more. So it's also helping our students articulate that value to a prospective employer, that they are not just useful now, but they will be useful later as well. And just to link to the AI conversation, lots of our students want to become innovation consultants. They want to work for the big firms, and they're noticing that the lower rungs on the job ladder are being incinerated by AI. But we also know that those companies at some point are going to need seniors. Where are they getting senior innovators from if they've destroyed all the junior innovation roles? So there's a really live discussion about how we help students navigate the fact that the bottom of the career ladder is in a bad state at the moment for some industries because of AI. So it's also worth pointing, we integrate a lot of AI into what we're doing, into the curriculum, into the discussion, so that actually students can demonstrate their value in using AI on the job, in the job, reforming the job when they get into employment.
Yeah, if we were designing a process for lifelong employability, we might not start where we are now. Okay. Lokesh, I think you've asked a point which probably touches on what Dave was just saying there. Do you want to unmute and raise it? Your point is about how we position graduates within innovation specialization.
Absolutely, because one of the key outcome of any graduation is going with a job from the campus, right? So most of the time, the people get confused actually what kind of new titles, because as an engineer, I'm open to really open up any kind of roles actually which is aligned with engineering. But actually, when you talk about innovation, even there is no clear career path for them. Actually, even many organizations don't even have Chief Innovation Officer even today, actually, thanks to ISO 56000, at least it brings all the innovation jigsaw puzzle pieces together, right? So I think there is some kind of alignment, including the definition of innovation, actually, right? So I think one of the key, the message, the leaders in the organization need to know the outcome of innovation specialists coming with graduation, right? So I think the awareness is extremely low. I think how do you really a forum like us can drive that actually? Even today, many times I get a question what will be my next role actually, if I'm really driving innovation. Still there are at the level one actually just managing ideas and managing platforms and so on and so forth.
It's interesting because you sort of raised the point there. Obviously, I'm assuming in this room, a lot of people are innovation professionals.
Absolutely.
And specialists. I think in lots of companies, innovation is something that you combine with something else. And obviously, in lots of cases, what our students are doing is they might work in marketing, but they're bringing innovation know-how to how they do marketing. Or they might be an engineer, but actually that awareness of kind of, user research, human-centered design is something that you can use to add value to being an engineer. So in the same way that I think our degrees bring elements together, I think actually what we're seeing is, But I take your point. It's not very clear what that career path looks like.
It's like this actually. Today, it's not about like you have an allocation for innovation time in your day work. Actually, it's always 100 plus 20. People who are really excited are the ones who are going extra mile. Rest of the people are really like not so keen about actually, because it's not really giving them an edge in their KPIs actually. So that's what is also is a big challenge. And then with the AI, how it will really transform. Possibly these kind of courses will bring a common language, a common purpose, and common definition across the world.
Well, it raises an interesting spectre of what comes after innovation. In that, if we're thinking about innovation as a radical change to the things that currently happen in organizations, what happens when this mainstreams? What happens when everybody does this? Lots of quite traditional business schools are now, entrepreneurship has gone from a very peripheral activity in most business schools to being quite central because it's fashionable right now. I think innovation is on a similar track. It's okay if they become the mainstream. Like, what happens then? What happens if everybody just assumes that they're innovating all of the time in any role that they happen to be doing? I don't know.
I think like similarly, even if you're quality management as well as project management, actually in 50s and 80s, was in similar scenario what we are really talking about on innovation, right? So I think like those things are solved puzzle today. I think innovation will not come to rest because what is best today may not suffice for tomorrow.
I know we could talk for much longer, but we're about 3 minutes from the hour. Dave's email is in the chat. All, if you want to, there might be multiple reasons for wanting to get in touch with him after this. Dave,
Mark's here as well.
And Mark, Dave, Mark, and your wider team, thanks for the fantastic work you're doing. Thanks for coming along and sharing some of your story, Dave. I know there's more to it, and there would be more questions too. Can we have an unmuted round of applause, all, for Dave, Mark, and the work that they're doing?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Great. Hey, that's good.
Thank you.